Okay, we're on Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, 47A. The art scroll is 47A, um, 47A2. Let's see on the right side. Levi bar Shmuel Ashkechinu L'Rab Abba L'Rav Huna bar Mchir. Levi, the son of Shmuel, met these two rabbis, and these two rabbis were standing at the entranceway of the house of Rav Huna. So he used this opportunity. The two rabbis standing there. He was there. He used the opportunity, and he said, "Ma'al lahazir amalu." So Levi said, "Ma'al lahazir mitashal tarsayim b'Shabbat." You have it, 4782 on the right side. Right column. Can you? What's the law behind reassembling a coppersmith's bed on the Shabbat? So Rashi explains that the coppersmiths, some of them were traveling salesmen, so to speak, but not a salesman, but traveling for their craft, going from city to city. What need you help? We need my help, and they would carry along with them a portable bed that they would set up and take apart. But the question was, they asked him, "Can you set up the bed on the Shabbat?" So Amrulay, so both those rabbis that were standing there said, "Shapidami, you can set up the bed. It's not a problem." That's not called. What's the issue? There's two possible issues. It might be building by setting it up, or might be that's one of possibility that there might be a concern, or some say that Rashi says that building does not the prohibition of build doesn't apply to a movable item. Building requires something that's not movable, so therefore this bed is movable. So the issue wasn't building. The issue was makava patish. Makava patish is one of the malachot on Shabbat, is doing the final blow. The final blow, when you do something to make something now usable, when you complete a utensil, that final blow that makes it usable, that is, let's say, let's say when you build a building, that last brick, let's say, or the last item that's now going to make the thing work, that is so every brick you put on could be part of the violation of building. But the first brick you're building, let's say, right? If you build it, but the last brick is called the final blow, and that makes it usable, makes it complete, makes the item complete. That would be makeh b'patij. And the question here is, by setting up the bed, you're making, but when you set it up, now you're completing the item. So is that called that you completed the item when you set it up, or the fact that you constantly set it up and you take it down and set it? It's not made to remain to that. That's not called you're completing the item if it's always made to set up and take down. So that is the warning. That is the question.
That's why it doesn't count.
That's why it doesn't count, because it's not called you completed. Would you look at that as right? Would you look at this as you completed the item when it's not made to be in this state? It's always made to be taken apart, right? That seems to be the question, and that the response is shapidami, that it's fine. It's not a problem. Um, they would carry this bed. It was made out of sections. At night, they would spread it out, put it together. Um, and we'll see later on more about Makeh Patish, Bezat Hashem, when you complete an item. Now, like I said, Rashi says building would be a problem only in ground, things that are attached to the ground or in the ground itself, but not in a utensil. Now, the question, someone will explain what is the question that they're asking. They're asking that, are they talking about setting up the bed in a very strong fashion, or setting up the bed in a very we'll call it loose setup? We're going to see that the question was setting it up in a loose fashion, not in a tight, very tight fashion. And someone will explain that the question is, would the rabbis say that this setting up the bed loosely, would they say it's forbidden because we're afraid if you're going to set it up loosely, you might come to set it up in a way that actually will be a problem. Actually would be a biblical violation. And they told him no. They told him no. It's not a problem. Setting up the bed in this fashion. Let's say we're going to explain it loosely. You're allowed to set it up loosely. What happened afterwards? Later on, Ata the Kamei Rabbi Yehuda, Levi, who asked the two rabbis, he came in front of Yehuda and he told Rabbi Yehuda let's say what the two rabbis said. And Rabbi Yehuda said, Oma, Harav Shmuel Damrit Havayu, these two rabbis say, if you go ahead and you put back the bed of this movable bed, it's chayiv chatat, it's chayiv a sin offering. Sin offering is only when you have a biblical violation undone unintentionally. I didn't know it was forbidden to be done, or I didn't know it was Shabbat. So they're saying it's a biblical violation. So therefore, on surface, it seems like the first rabbi said it's permitted. First rabbi says it's permitted. The second rabbi said it's a biblical violation. We don't have that type of usual difference between two opinions. That one opinion said it's biblically forbidden, and one opinion says it's even permitted rabbinically. Right? That's a very large distance between two opinions. Right? That one says you're violating the Torah, and one says you're not violating the Torah, and it's even permitted on a rabbinic level. So some want to say that the question that they're asking is, can I put it together loosely, right? That was the question. And they said, you're allowed to put it together loosely. And maybe the point is we're not making, but the other rabbi says, no. The other rabbi says, if you make, good morning, Asaf, if you put the bed together in a very tight, it would be a biblical violation. So if it be a biblical violation by setting it up strongly, so therefore there would be a rabbinic violation. There should be a rabbinic injunction not to do it even loosely, lest you come to do it tightly. That's what some want to explain. Now, so we have an argument here in the Gemara whether you could set up a bed, put together these sections loosely. So the Gemara says, Meitiv, I'll ask you the following question. Knei menorah b'Shabbat. The branch of the menorah on Shabbat, chayev chatat. Hamachzir knei menorah. If you put back the branch, we're talking about menorah, candelabra that has many branches that you light with. And sometimes you take off some of the branches, movable branches. And when you need to, you put back the branches. You want more light, more branches, more light. So if you return one of the branches to the menorah Shabbat, morning Simon, he's doing the malacha of makeh patish. He's finalizing, the final blow. He's making that usable by putting the branch onto making it a utensil. So if you return a branch of a menorah on Shabbat, it's chayiv chatat. It's a Torah violation. Kinei sayadin, but then they had the sayadin, the plaster people, that they plaster the house. They have a long stick, and the stick is made from different sections. You want to adjust it, make it longer, shorter. And in the top of the stick, they put, let's say, a shmata cloth, which they put the cloth. It's like a paintbrush into the plaster, and then they take the plaster and they place it on the put it against the walls of the house. And sometimes you need a smaller brush, sometimes you need a longer brush. So they take a section out, they add a section. So what about if you would put one of those sections in on Shabbat? Would that be a biblical violation or not of making it into a utensil? You made it. It's like you completed a utensil by adding one of these layers, one of the branches of this stick. So they were pretty capable back then, right? They had these type of brushes, sticks, shorter or longer, right? Different parts. When you need a longer, you need a shorter. I mean, Rashi says, when you go ahead and you have to reach a higher place, go higher on the walls, you got to go ahead and add to the stick. And another section. So is that a biblical violation? Not Patur says no. It's not. It's not a biblical violation of a lasur. But you can't do that rabbinically. You can't go ahead and on Shabbat add to the stick of the plaster people. So he says the rabbinic prohibition. Now, since you're constantly putting together, taking apart, adding, subtracting, that's not called finishing a job. It's never meant to remain that way. Always meant to. That's not called maka patish final blow. Therefore, there is no biblical violation. But he says it's still a rabbinic violation. Rav Samoy says, Karen Agula, this is a horn. Simon, we are on 47A2, bottom of the page, last two lines, 47A2 on the right side. Karen Agula, if you have a instrument, a horn that's round, and you place inside of it, you put the like a khalil, you put some sort of stick, and the way they explain this case, um, if you look on 26, note 26 is the round horn. There's a round horn and a straight horn. The music, the musical instruments, there's they place different pipes that are placed in, and that helps with, and they're gonna make certain sounds. And the pipes of the round horn they say are inserted very tightly. It's like you need it's an extra type of job to get that pipe of the that you place it to the round horn, and to be exact and tight properly to get that right sound, and you need the technician to put it back. So you're really making, and you make it tight. That's really making it a much more of a permanent type of thing. It's tight, it's complete, and therefore, if you go ahead and you put that together on the Shabbat, that would be a biblical violation. However, good morning, Nathan. Good to see you.
Morning.
Hope everything is doing well in California.
Baruch Hashem.
We miss you over here. So we were discussing about putting together a traveling bed, certain type of bed that the travelers, people who were coppersmiths would go to city, and they would put together a bed. The question was, are they allowed to put that bed together on Shabbat? And the way some of the commentators explain, we're talking about putting it together loosely, not tightly. But if you put it together loosely, would the rabbis make a rabbinic prohibition of putting that loosely? Because maybe you might put it together tightly in a way that would be considered finishing the job, completing a utensil by putting it together. And we had two different opinions in the Gemara whether you could put together that bed or not on the Shabbat. And the Gemara is challenging the opinions that the rabbis that allowed you, because we find by a we have a case over here by the story of a menorah, that if you have branches of menorah that are taken out and placed back in to the menorah, if you put it back together, if you put it together, it would be a biblical. If you put that branch back in, it will be a biblical violation. So too, the Gemara is saying, if that's the case, so put, um, if you would tighten the bed, if you would put a bed back together and you would tighten it, the Gemara is saying it should also be a biblical violation. And if it's a biblical violation, so the Gemara is understanding, so then there should be a rabbinic violation of setting up the bed, even if you set it up loosely, because if you would do it tightly, there would be a biblical violation. So that seemingly is what they. If you could show me, because if you could show me that putting it together tightly would be a biblical violation, then putting it together loosely should be a rabbinic violation, and therefore you should not be able to put it together loosely. And the Braita says, Reb Simoy talks about different types of horns, musical instruments, that the round horn, if you put it together, with to put the pipes in the round horn, we have to put it very tightly, that's a biblical violation. But Kerem Shuta, but if it's a straight horn, where it's done loosely, and therefore you don't need a technician, and they're made, and the pipes that are placed in the straight horn are made to be inserted and removed constantly, so then inserting them would be a rabbinic violation. So that's what he said. So the Gemara says, so these rabbis, how did these rabbis allow to put together this bed? It should be a problem, because there should be a rabbinic prohibition, because maybe you're going to come to violate the Torah prohibition of making of makeh b'patesh, a final blow, by making the bed very tight. So the Gemara says, Inu da'amaki haitana. These rabbis go like the following Tana. The Tanya, we learned in the Braita. We're now on 47a, 3 on the right side. They hold like the following Tana. The Tanya, we learned in the Braita, Milav no tamita, and the karo tamita, v'lachayim shosikivutz. So what are these things? So in the earlier days, when the houses had dirt floors, the wooden legs of the beds, they would be inserted into a socket, which in that socket rested, like by the Mishkan, the boards were into a socket. It put into a socket the legs, and it rested on the ground and protected the legs from any wetness, any moisture. So if you're going to go ahead and stick it in on Shabbat, if you're going to put the leg into that socket on Shabbat, or the karot hamita, or the legs of the bed itself, which can be detached from the bed, from the frame, and reattached to the frame. The legs come off and the legs go back onto the frame of the bed, or the vachim shel sikivus. That is they have a nut. This is a piece of wood that attaches to the cross, by the bow and the arrow. It's attached to the crossbow, and it serves to guide where the arrow goes. Rashi says it's a small piece of wood, like a board that you stick into the bow. And on that piece of wood, it seems like, and against that piece of wood, the arrow, it sounds like you place the arrow on that piece of wood, and therefore the arrow will go, in the direction where the piece of wood is. Right? It helps the arrow, by having the arrow, let's say Rashi sounds like the arrow rests on that piece of wood, gives it a certain base, and then you pull back the arrow, and then it shoots. So if you placing that piece of wood into the bow on Shabbat, so all those things lo yazir, you shouldn't reattach any, putting the leg of the bed back in, or putting the leg into the socket, or putting that piece of wood into the bow on Shabbat. You should not reattach it on Shabbat. But if you did reattach it, potur aval asur. It's potur aval asur. It's rabbinically you're not violating the Torah, but it's rabbinically forbidden. Why? Because the legs of the bed we're talking about movable, portable legs that often come out, and this piece of wood they take out and put it different directions. Sounds like, or it comes out. It goes this way or that way. These are constantly made to be. These attachments are constantly made to put on and to take out. Good morning, Dr. Rosen. And because it is made. We're going to have tonight, by the way, Doctor, the Zoom.
Right.
Because it's made to be attached regularly, so attaching them is not called you did the final blow. Because final blow this is final, but it's not. It's not. It's made to be taken apart. Nevertheless, the rabbis say you can't go ahead and attach. With Dr. Rosa, we are on 47b1. We just turned the page. 40 Mazel Tov, Mabruk. We turned 47b1, right, Simon? That the rabbis are here to protect. So the rabbi said, don't return the leg of the bed to the bed, or the leg into the socket, because you might nail it in. If you might nail it in, therefore the rabbis say, don't go ahead and do that. It's similar to the story with Rabbi David Feinstein of blessed memory. When I recall, here we have a man who deals with glasses. We have an optometrist. What's the law if my glass lens fell out of my glasses on Shabbat? Am I allowed to put my glass lens back in on Shabbat? But Feinstein told me you can't put it back in. Also, you should, and I'll tell you why. Because if I put it back in, maybe it'll tighten it with the screw, right? And if you tighten it with a screw, then you're making it usable in a proper way. You're completing the glasses. So on Shabbat, that's the problem of makeh b'patish.
Better to be blind the whole Shabbat and not be able to read the Siddur and not read the parasha.
It's better to listen with your ears than read. We can't violate even the rabbinic law. The rabbis would say better don't violate let's do your best. You do your best with your eyes. Take safety precautions.
The glasses just snap in. It doesn't have the screws.
Okay, but even if it wouldn't have screws, it might. That's a good question, but it might be a problem that now that it's back, because there are glasses that have screws, and therefore, that might be a problem to say if I would put my glass back in. Now it's making it usable. So it's a good question that you're asking, Simon. Glasses that don't have a screw, would there be any difference or not a difference? But you're taking something that's not usable. The glasses without the lens is not usable, right? And now you're completing it into a product.
It happened during Shabbat.
It happened during Shabbat. So I'm stuck till after Shabbat. What am I supposed to do? Let's say I'll give you a different case, Simon. Your mezuzah falls off the wall on Shabbat. What, Rabbi? You can't reattach your mezuzah on Shabbat. I think of Avadi Yosef maybe says best try not to use that room. Now you don't have a mezuzah in that room, but you have to see what he says. But it fell off on Shabbat. I can't reattach the mezuzah to the wall. That's a different story. It's not because of maybe that's like attaching something to a wall. Maybe it's like maybe you might come to build something. Maybe it's under that category. But here I'm just using the example of the glasses that so you're not driving a car on Shabbat, so you don't need the glass. I'm just saying, Simon, but you're going to miss out. You're right. To you, Right, you got to read. You know what? I'm gonna figure out how to work with the situation with my glass. You know what we have? That's what Dr. Rosen would like you to buy a spare pair of glasses. How do you like that? So you got, yeah, you know.
I have two. I have one of
Okay.
one in my coat.
So you have a spare pair of glasses just in case. Usually what I do is I have my old pair of glasses is my spare. In case something happens, if I can't find my new one, so at least I have the spare until in between, Simon. So you got that spare. So that's why you got to have a spare pair just in case it ever happens. We know it happens very rarely that your lens falls out, and even if the lens falls out, who says it's going to happen on Shabbat? So the odds are not. Talk to the actuaries. The odds are pretty, in your favor. So, but beware of that point. And I saw there's a safe. The Rabbi Ribia has a sefer called Lamed Tet Melochot, third nine Melochot. And he also discusses this issue about the problem of putting back a lens. You can take further discussion. It's a great sefer. I recommend everyone should have it. It's called Lamed Tet Melochot, the third nine Melochot by Rabbi Ribia. So it says, Lo yit avalasuf, v'lo yitga. With that being said, we're saying you can't go ahead and nail it in, right? These things, the leg of the bed, or the morning Nathan. Look, we got Nathan live. It's much better have him in person. So welcome, Bruchim Habayim, welcome back. The leg of the bed, we said you should not put it back reattach it to the frame of the bed on Shabbat. But if you did it, we said, since it's made constantly to be taken apart and set up, that's not you're not in violation on a Torah level, but it's rabbinic prohibition. However, the lo yitga, don't use don't use nails. Meaning, if you went ahead, good morning, Mr. Rapport. If you went ahead and you use a nail to attach it, v'imtoka chayiv chatat. Then, if you attach it with a nail, if you attach the leg to the bed, like with a nail, or in my case, I would say, if you take the glass lens, then you put it into the glasses, and then you adjust it with the screw, and you put the screw in. That might be a biblical violation on Shabbat.
You had a piece of tape. Could you tape or with a piece of string hold the lens to the frame? It's not the perfection, it's not the finishing, it's just getting it approximately in the right place so that you could use the glasses.
So it would seem that might be a rabbinic issue because less you do it in a permanent way. Meaning, if I'm going to put my lens in any way, then I might come to put it in the real way by attaching with the screw. So that should be an issue. But maybe we can look at the Lamed Tet Malacha Sefer. Maybe we'll see if they have it here. See maybe more details about it, because this happens. It can happen to someone in their once in a while, and you might not always have the spare pair of glasses available for you. Certainly, if I can't put it in, reattach it loosely, I certainly can't do it through nails. And the point of the Gemara saying certainly you can't do it through nails is really a setup for the next halacha. And im taka, if you did it with the nail, chayav chatat, he's obligated a sin offering, because I'm talking about he did it unintentionally, not knowing that I couldn't do it, and I violated the Shabbat. So that would be a requirement to bring a sin offering for the biblical violation of Shabbat unintentionally. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, if these items, im hoya rafui, if you place the leg into the frame of the bed, but it was loose, whatever you did here was loose, you went ahead and you put the piece of wood into the bow to guide the arrow loosely, but it wasn't done tightly, he's of the opinion mutar. He says,
where once upon a time you had windows that had not hurricane quality glass, put the wood in the frame without attaching it in any way. You're protecting the window from the big wind. And it was meant to assemble and meant to disassemble. I thought that might be permitted because it's everything is already fully formed.
And you're not putting it in to leave it there.
Right.
Because if you put it in to leave it there, that would definitely, good morning, should be a problem. Right? If you put it to leave it there, that you're adding to the building. Right? That but it's made to right, movable shutters. So that based on this halacha, this opinion might be, because this opinion says, okay, we have to look up, each case has to be looked up, because he says if it was loose, which might be, now the question is how tight does it click in? You know what I'm saying? You know, that might also play a role, because he says if it is loose, now today's day and age, when people make everything very well, not they don't want it to be loose, but if it's loose, he says mutar, then it's permitted. Why? Because he says the way the Ran explains, if you put it back in a loose fashion, it's clear that you don't want to make it permanently. You don't want to put in a nail. Because if you wanted to put in a nail in it, or you wanted nail would be much more of a permanent type of thing. And he says they don't make a gezerah, they're not going to make a rabbinic prohibition on something that you put it back in a way that's clear that it's loose, that you're not interested in making it in a permanent way. But it could, it could be the nature of those boards are always made to take off it, right? But these boards, no one wants to leave it on the window, right? It's maybe, I wonder if it's clear by the fact that this is covering your windows, right? Like in California or whatever, hurricanes, right? What? Florida, I'm sorry. But once it's not, it's hurricane, they both are hurricane places, right? No, not hurricane. Oh, the wildfire. I'm sorry. The hurricane in Florida. So if you put it on the it's maybe it's obvious you're not leaving it. You're not interested in making it tight, unless you say no. People want it tight because it's going to ensure that the window won't break. So it might be different. You know, if you say maybe that is something that you might. It's not recognizable that you don't want it tight, because maybe the nature is you want it tight. So it's a good question how, over there. So now the Gemara says, and that's what he wants to say, that the story with the bed, putting together this traveling bed, if it's done in a loose, they would put it together. He's learning the rabbis that allowed you to put together this copper stitched bed that they travel with from city to city, with that it's talking about putting it together loosely. So since they're putting it together loosely, it's recognized that you're not interested in making it tight. So we're not afraid of the concern.
You take it to the next town.
Right. But the fact that you take it to the next town doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make it loose, Nathan. So if you wouldn't make it loose, there would be a problem, even though it's something you take to the next town. So, but here we're talking about when you made it loose. They Rav Chama have a mita galinisa. The house of Chama, they had a bed, a sectional bed made of different sections. And this is the type of bed, this traveling bed. And having mahadule b'yom tova, they would set it up on Yom Tov. Now, the issue of makav patish, completing a job, making something usable, the last blow applies both to Shabbat. Remember, all the malachot of Shabbat apply to Yom Tov, except for certain things that are connected with food preparation, that there are certain allowances, certain things that we allow on Yom Tov. But this is not connected with food preparation by completing a blow, finishing utensil on Shabbat or on Yom Tov. So one of the rabbis said to Rabbi, "My daiteich, what was the allowance that you allowed this? Binyamin atzadu. Why is it? What's the reason for this? Because this is Binyamin atzad. This is not the normal way of building. You don't usually, this type of bed is not the normal way of building. Are you going to say, are you going to say, because the bed is not nailed in, it's this temporary bed that's made to put on it? Not that when you set it up, put a nail in, and every time you take it apart, you take it off. and it's not strongly attached, are you going to tell me, therefore, that's why there's no biblical prohibition? There's no nail when you set up the bed. It's not tight, even if there's no nail, it's not tight, and therefore there's no biblical prohibition. But Nihi, the Yisur Deraita, like there's no biblical prohibition, but Yisur Derabana Mi'ika, there should be a rabbinic prohibition by setting up this bed. That was the question that he asked the rabbi. Even if you're not setting it up tightly, even if you're not using a nail, say Amalei says, no, I hold like Rav Shimon Gamliel. They hold that if you do something that it's recognized, we're not interested in making it tight. If it's loose, it's not a problem. Amalei, anak Rav Shimon Gamliel really. I look Rav Shimon Gamliel, Imaya Rafui, the Amah that says Imaya Rafui, if it was loose, mutar, it would be permitted. So according to this, Nathan, it would sound like, so the question would be, how would we look at if you want to take the glass and put it in halfway somehow, if there would be such a way.
Taped it to the outside of the frame and not the inside of it.
And it's still loose. Let's say you show that it's still hanging, right? Now, the other question is if you're not, maybe not allowed to tape it on Shabbat. That might be a different issue of taping something on Shabbat. Connecting something that might be an issue. We don't generally pre-existing, right. And therefore pre-cut tape, right? If you had a pre-cut tape and it's pre-cut, and it's clear that you're not doing this in a permanent fashion, so that might be in a way if you put the glass in that everybody sees that it's loose, like you see it's not in well, right? It's a little out of the frame, like you're right. That there's a little. It seems like there might be room. I'm not poskening. Okay, I want to wish everyone a great day. We were talking about if your lens falls out of your glasses on Shabbat, you can't put your lens back in. Because we're afraid if you put your lens back in, first of all, you might tighten it with the screw, and that tightening with a screw would be might be a biblical prohibition of making something permanent and usable. You heard halacha on the deal. Have a great day, everybody.
You put the contact lens back in? You're not
Okay, you're not fixing contact lens in your eyes, because that's for your eyes. It's not a utensil. You're not putting any utensil. It's not a utensil.
Maybe that's the answer.
It's not an issue of building or final blow. You just
Actually, you do that regardless on Friday.
Yeah. So isn't that amazing? We had a optometrist here on such a Gemara. Yeah. I gotta write it down. I gotta write this down.
There was another book to look at.
Yeah, look at because you'll appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because you as an optometrist, there's a book called Lamed Tet Malachot, 39 Malachot. It's written by Rabbi Ribiat. They might have it here. Let me see. It's a great